Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Olson.
And I'm Kristen Humans.
We are sharing kind of a quiet moment here at Wyoming State Capitol in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Had a couple of days to kind of look back and recoup from a great Centennial celebration.
It was so much fun. Thousands of people coming into Wyoming to celebrate our 100th birthday.
One of the great sights, of course, is Old Glory with 44 stars, and that's hanging over the state capitol this summer. You're looking at it right now. And, of course, the 44th star added, signifying Wyoming's entrance into statehood. A lot of great things going on this summer. I guess the biggest Centennial event had to be the wagon train.
Oh, absolutely. Hundreds of people loaded aboard wagons and hit the dusty trail to experience what our forefathers experienced in coming to Wyoming and settling this great state.
Along for the ride, at least part of the way, were Craig Kennedy and photographer Ron Sniffen, and they share this Centennial wagon train story for you.
Life on the Wyoming Centennial wagon train. Only these hardy souls who lived it for 30 hot and dusty days and sometimes bitter cold nights can tell you what it was like. They have earned the right to say they were part of the single longest, most exhaustive event of the Wyoming Centennial.
I didn't know how tough it was. I'm one tough lady. I'm ready to keep going. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Now, before the wagon train finally rolled into Cody July 2nd, there was a little matter of 260 miles to take care of. 260 miles that began June 2nd in Fort Casper, then loosely followed the original trail cut by Jim Bridger, a route that the pioneers took after the Indians made the Mormon Trail route rather uncomfortable. Whether it's 1890 or 1990, it takes a special breed to endure all the trail's hazards for 30 straight days. Special people like Helen Boreski, who at her husband's urging hit the trail with only her horses as companions.
The terrain has been unbelievable. We've had ruts and breakdowns, and it's been wonderful.
Would you have missed it for the world?
No, not for $1 million.
When we caught up with the wagon train, camp had already been set for a 98-degree Thursday afternoon just southeast of Powell. The worst was behind them. From this point on, asphalt and green grass was waiting, but not tonight.
I thought you blew those up.
Tia does.
Modern-day comforts are a welcome relief after a day on the trail.
Well, it's better sleeping on an air mattress than on cactus.
The camp circles are where friendships are made. People share their stories, exchange ideas, catch up on the news. It's also a place for a little horsing around.
Finally, pair of boots! Take the boots! I hate you! I hate you! KJ, I'll never forget you!
Is this a wet t-shirt?
I'll never!
Now!
Here! I'll never forget you! I'll never forget.
The old horse tank is just one of many things these folks had. The original pioneers did not. 300 gallons of water a day for the horses, another 150 gallons for the people. Another thing these folks had the pioneers didn't, mobile radio phones. A lot of folks wish they'd done without them here. Also, an ambulance and porta potties. And one thing the pioneers definitely did not have, a 40-foot refrigerated trailer stocked full of everything your heart desired.
The old Conestoga wagon hauled sugar and flour and spices and stuff like that, you know. They serviced the wagon train, too. But this is a little sophisticated. I've got all means of produce. I got carrots, well, apples, oranges, carrots, celery, cauliflower.
Hot chocolate, chips, milk, bread, eggs, drink mix, all kinds of meat. About the only thing in scarce supply, ice to keep it all cool. Now, not everybody on the trail followed the original way of life, though they'd lead you to believe otherwise.
These are jackrabbit hamburgers. Best we could find on the prairie.
With all the horseback riders, they don't have their wagon to keep their stuff in, so they come by with a trailer every evening and bring their stuff into camp. But we find some of them we can't get back out of camp. It's like a security blanket. They're afraid to get away from that trailer.
Security blanket or not, these folks joined the wagon train to be part of history. No, not everybody's a real cowboy, but plenty are.
Oh, there's a great number of these people that are excellent people and really know what they're doing. And they've come together on this wagon train to offer the tourist or the person that doesn't know the opportunity to actually live the experience.
What is there to do for kids?
Oh, I don't know. Just ride. Go riding after at night when it's cooled off and look for, hunt rattlesnakes. And
Have you found any?
yeah, we found 2 of them.
And what'd you do with them?
Killed them.
And it wasn't the least bit uncommon to find scorpions out here. Seems after 26 days on the trail, everybody's got a story.
I've been on it about a week, and it's been the most exciting thing I've done in a while. Hold up. He didn't like it at first, the horse didn't. He's a BLM horse. I adopted him at the wild horse auction in Cheyenne. He threw me twice and dragged me through camp once. He didn't like this too much.
As the sun started going down on the Willwood camp, we caught up with one of the most famous members of the wagon train, the young man who earned the name Cactus Cody.
I fell in the cactus.
Fell in the cactus?
Mm-hmm.
How did it happen?
Keep falling.
How many times you fell in the cactus?
3.
3?
3 times now?
No. Try 30.
30.
At least once a day, sometimes twice.
When the day is done, it's time for fun. And a little slice of the Old West can be found in every wagon circle.
Hey, look in. Why you got to look in? I'm looking something up with me. Hey, baby, don't you think maybe we could find...
It was about 1 in the morning when we decided to turn in. Trust me, the music from this camp lasted long into the night. And chances are pretty good that the gal running the grill, Sheila Hagan, crossed paths with the night owls when she got up to fix the grits.
So when's the day start for you?
3:30.
3:30.
Did you eat yet?
Yeah.
Want some more?
No, I'm fine.
This Friday morning began much like the day we just left behind, dusty and hot. And you knew after the day's news had been read, breakfast fed, it was back to work. Time to tear down camp, get ready for another day's ride. A ride that even a cowboy with a handicap would not miss out on.
Good boy. Okay, I got it.
Okay. Ooh. Ooh now. Ooh now. Ooh. Ooh boy. Ooh now. Usually having a scare for them. Ooh now. Ooh now. Oh. Gotcha. Okay. Go up.
Almost 5 hours after the sun first began the day, it was finally time to hitch 'em up, head 'em out. From a hilltop just outside of Powell, one could see just how impressive the wagon train really is. You get a better idea of just how vulnerable this little moving town could be 100 years ago. For all the stops along the way, the train members say, a lot of folks rolled out the red carpet, but none with such flair as the people of Powell. For this, the arrival of the Centennial wagon train would be their Centennial event. And as the folks on the street told us, one of the biggest things to happen in this Park County town ever. As the tail end of the wagon train was still winding through Powell, the first wagons were arriving at the most lush campsite along the way, Park County Fairgrounds. The grass green and the showers just a few steps away. But like every other day at the end of the trail, there was work ahead, back to setting up the tent. But on this night, the reward was waiting. Willie Nelson was here. And this is what a lot of wagon train folks had been waiting for ever since leaving Fort Casper. And while Willie delivered the goods, friends rejoiced that they had made the trip. A trip based on history that will go down in history.
We have moved down the road to here in front of the Union Pacific Depot, another historic symbol, Kristen, of the history of transportation, and things improved from wagon trains very quickly.
Certainly, as you could tell from the last story, a very, very bumpy ride across Wyoming, and then, of course, the steam engines came and are moving in and out of this depot right here.
This was the place to be not that many years ago, and that was relived this year as the Union Pacific put together their historic Centennial train pulled by the venerable steam locomotive 844. Wendy Guerin was along for the ride, and she shares that ride with us right now.
Enjoy.
How you doing?
Fine.
Okay, there's a rail here.
brings back memories when my father used to work for the railroad, Union Pacific. Came to Wyoming in 1933, and been here ever since.
There's nothing quite like riding a train. It's like living everything you ever read in your history books about the old iron horses. That's what the Indians call them. Many say they civilized the West, but standing in this car as Wyoming turns 100 years old, all I can think about is the past and what it must have been like to travel on a train.
So when you were riding along between Cheyenne and Wyoming, what kind of thoughts were going through your head about all this?
All the thoughts of the old steam days and how people used to make these trips in the olden days. And it was just a very exciting, romantic feeling going through my blood at all times. And it was just, I knew that it was something that I'd never get a chance to do again, probably.
I really enjoy it. It reminds me of the Old West and what it was like in those days.
As I ride through there, I imagine what it used to be like in the pioneer days with the Indians on the ridge, you know, and the old wood-burning engines. It really must have been quite exciting.
Well, the last train I was on, I kind of thought of having Indians attacking, but with this one being so nice, I really kind of just enjoy myself.
I remember trains as being jiggle, 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 jiggle. And isn't this smooth? Oh, it's so much.
Here we go. I can hear. Isn't that pretty? Wow. You got
Centennial trips and old steam engines are naturals for bringing train buffs out of the woodwork. Some just come for the ride. Others are drawn to old 844, the last steam locomotive built for the Union Pacific Railroad. While it kept to a slower pace on this Centennial trip, 844's been known to exceed 100 miles an hour.
The steam engines have quite a nostalgia, and a lot of people come out just to hear the whistle and see the mammoth locomotive operate, like the big drivers and all the power that it exerts. Of course, they're beautiful as far as photography, and lots of photo fans come around to shoot pictures because they make smoke.
It goes clear back to when I was a kid. I remember going and seeing, when we go to the depot, seeing these 800s pulling trains, and they were in regular service then. So it's kind of interesting to come back and ride a train like this.
One day we saw 3985, the Challenger, rolling down Sherman Hill, and we started following it, and it's just setting all fires and just having a wonderful time.
So you get into trains?
Yeah.
When I was a little kid, they had the steam engines run through our ranch. You know, we used to get on them and ride them. They'd stop and let us ride.
So they're a fascinating object, and there's something that it sort of gets in your blood, and you just become a real buff. Actually, anything that rolls on wheels on the rails.
Brian, Wyoming, with its beautiful blue skies and wide open spaces, very quickly became very attractive to the world's foreigners.
Certainly did, hoping for a new start, and many of those people from many different country and ethnic backgrounds came right through the Union Pacific Depot here in Cheyenne and all over Wyoming to make this state an extra special place. I guess you could call them very important strands of Wyoming's fabric.
They certainly did, and they spread out through the state. They established their roots, and through generation, they have experienced the Wyoming way.
And as Melissa Jew shows us now, a variety of ethnic backgrounds have really made Wyoming a truly special place.
Slide and jump, slide and jump. Hey, point that toe.
The American flag flies outside of Elizabeth Tollerton's dance studio every day. That's because Tollerton, born in Eltville, Germany, is American.
I wanted to become an American citizen, and that was one of my very big things in my life, I think, or decision also, because this is my country. Like the song goes, this is my country.
Tollerton is one example of Wyoming's ethnic heritage, a heritage that should not be overlooked this centennial year. Wyoming history books tell us the Northern Europeans and the Asians were the first immigrant settlers to the state back in the 1860s. Most came to find jobs working in the mines or for the railroad. Today, there are 50 different nationalities represented in the state, ranging from the Irish to the Yugoslavians, folks whose descendants helped settle Wyoming. Toshiro Tsuyomatsu's parents are some of those pioneers. Ben and Masa Tsuyomatsu grew up in the same village of Fukuoka, Japan. They were married in California before moving to Wyoming, where they lived for 60 years.
He'd heard all about America. If you went to America and made $1 million, you can come back and retire for the rest of your life. So this appealed to him.
Ben Tsuyomatsu hoped to make his million by repairing shoes in California. That dream wore thin after several years.
He'd heard a lot about the cowboys and Indians, and by this time, he'd kind of given up on the idea he was going to make $1 million. His wife was here, and money didn't come as easily as he had anticipated.
In 1919, the Tsuyomatsus moved to Wyoming, where Ben got a job on the railroad near Casper.
And it was a little bit hard on my mother, because she'd come from a place that was densely populated and a lot of activity out there. There was just nothing.
Step, hop, close.
Settling in Wyoming was not a smooth transition for Tollerton either. Elizabeth Endress began her career at the age of 5 with the Frankfurt Ballet Company. She toured throughout Europe, then performed for American servicemen. The young dancer met First Lieutenant Jess Tollerton in Erlangen, Germany after World War I. They were married in Missouri. Then Tollerton was transferred to Warren Air Force Base.
I never voted. I was too young. I never voted for Hitler or for any of the Nazi parties. But still, I came from Germany, so you had to prove yourself, and I think I did that. And
when I was growing up in Casper, there were only 2 Japanese families in Casper. And that makes a difference. It was a lot different than, say, in California, where there were many Japanese and Chinese and so forth.
Frances Hardy and Doris Torgeson remember a happy childhood growing up with their Austrian-born parents in Cheyenne. Frank Hardy moved to Wyoming after World War I to work for the railroad. He later married their mother, Johanna, also from Austria. Frances and Doris remember many Austrian customs from their parents.
At Christmas time, we always would gather around the Christmas tree, and they'd sing O Tannenbaum and Stille Nacht and some of the Austrian carols, and then we'd open our presents.
Échappé down.
Tollerton, Tsuyomatsu, and the Hardys are part of an unfinished ballet called Wyoming History. Every step of the dance is different, but when you look at them together, they all fall into place.
In Wyoming, we didn't have close-knit ethnic communities. There was much more mixing of the ethnic groups, and I think in large part that's because it was such a small place. that people, in order to get along, in order to work with the other people in their community, had to work with people of other ethnic groups.
Today, there are still different ethnic groups arriving in Wyoming. A recent example, an increase in the Vietnamese population. Historians believe immigrants will continue to settle in the cowboy state during the next 100 years.
You can't go to any state or any country where you would feel uncomfortable. The people wouldn't make you feel at home, that you wouldn't be welcome. You wouldn't have the same type of opportunity for employment. And we've tried to do that.
Acceptance is what kept Tollerton in Cheyenne. She has taught dance for 38 years. Tollerton says it's Wyoming people that keep her on her toes.
They're very trustworthy, I think, very trustworthy. But you better not lie to them or cheat them, and they will not forget. And this is very good. It's a good feeling. It's a real hardy, real Americana, I think.
Esther Hobart Morris. This statue typifies the ideals of Wyoming, that of equality and of women's suffrage.
Right here on the statue, too.
That's right.
Esther Hobart Morris, proponent of the legislative act which in 1869 gave distinction to the territory of Wyoming as the first government in the world to grant women's equal rights. In fact, that was a key part of Wyoming joining the Union, women's suffrage.
Certainly was. They said you take us with our women voting or you don't take us at all.
You had a chance in our Centennial coverage to meet a fascinating lady who was here before Wyoming was a state.
Certainly was. I met a very special friend this year. Her name is Ida Fox, and in fact, she was 4 years old when Wyoming became a state. She stayed in Wyoming throughout its first 100 years, has so many memories to share, and we captured a few for you.
In any pioneer country, a woman has to assume many roles, which she's not required to do. When in a more settled situation, she has to take the place of men many times. So she becomes stronger, both mentally and physically, I think, and more independent.
The year 1890, Wyoming was born into statehood, and the successful American woman, as we know her today, took her first hard-earned breath as well. Ida Fox was just 4 years old when women voters made New York's front pages, but it wasn't long before she would travel east herself and realize the value of her Wyoming citizenship.
My mother had a cousin whose husband was one of the instructors at Columbia University. They had me for dinner one night, and another guest was one of the old professors there. And when they introduced me, they said that I was from Wyoming and the suffrage state. And he said, well, he said that my sister has never lived west of the Mississippi. She knows nothing about women's suffrage, and I thank God for it.
That attitude kept Eastern women to the side, while Western women marched to the beat of a new drum, a patriotic beat that Ida heard even as a child during the Spanish-American War.
And I remember my sisters and I had blue dresses, and we sewed yellow stripes down the sides of the dresses to show that we were cavalrymen, and we whittled out wooden swords. And we charged uphill and downhill, and we had each one of us had a saddle horse, and we rode those horses to death, charging up hills and down dales, much to the amusement of our families.
With the turn of the century, the equality state continued to draw attention, including that of the new president, Teddy Roosevelt. His visit, an emotional highlight in Ida's memory.
And my grandmother took me to do, my sisters and myself, 3 of us, from our ranch, 30 miles. We drove to Cheyenne for the dinner. And afterwards, as we passed through the reception line, my grandmother said, Mr. President, that was at the time of his residency, Mr. President, these little girls drove 30 miles across the prairies to shake your hand. And he said, I've forgotten some appropriate remark he made, but I will always remember how gracious he was to us 3 little girls.
It was a time of wealth, grace, and elegance, set on an untamed frontier that occasionally kicked up its heels. Ida fondly remembers the first frontier days, standing cautiously around the arena, and when grandstand seats were available, eyeing the frontier's finest.
And there were some ladies who sat right behind us, and they had on the most beautiful dresses with the skirt, or the full long length skirts, you know. But the skirts had the ruffles instead of being on the outside. They were silk ruffles of different colors, red and green and so forth, inside to make the skirts stand out further. And I kept turning around and looking at them and looking at them, and I just admired them and thought so mother. My mother kept moving me back, and it wasn't for years later that I found out that these were ladies of the night from the West End.
To say the least, it was a colorful 100 years. Happy birthday, Wyoming. You too, Ida. You're two of a kind.
Well, welcome back to the Capitol grounds. This was the scene July 10th, 1990, when we look back at July 10th, 1890. Some 10,000 people out here for an historic reenactment of the statehood ceremonies.
And exciting it was, and our reporter Glenn Campbell was there and now turns your clock back to 1890 to let you experience what we all experienced on July 10th.
Here in the open air, neath the crest of the continent, Wyoming, forming the keystone of the arch of states extending from ocean to ocean, celebrates an event significant in the extreme, new in the history of our country, and without precedent in the world. That is to say, a state that in adopting its Constitution extends free and equal suffrage to its citizens regardless of sex.
July 10th, 1990, a day that will long be remembered in Wyoming history as a day of remembrance and reenactments. For 100 years earlier, Wyoming became a state. Wyoming, the 44th state to enter the Union, was the first to give women the right to vote. Known today as the Equality State, Wyoming has its motto set in deep roots that go back to the turn of the century.
For we tread enchanted ground today, and we're glorious, proud, and great. Our Independence Day has come. Wyoming is a state.
It wasn't the warmest of July mornings. 100 years after Wyoming became a state, hundreds, then thousands turned out to see the recreation of events of 100 years past. However, the tire of standing or being a little chilled seemed to disappear. It was hard to think of one's self-comfort, especially when remembering those standing in the same spot 100 years ago and what they went through while turning a rough, rugged Dakota territory into a free standing state.
We are free. Victory henceforth perches upon the anthem of triumph. Again from the din of war comes the words of hero captain and president, as if in benediction. Let us have peace, and the angel of peace, with her loving smile, settles down upon the united country. Happy land, grand achievement.
I thank you for this copy of our state constitution. And in their name also, I especially thank you for that clause in this Constitution which guarantees their enfranchisement. In the history of the world, it has seldom been the good fortune of a body of lawmakers to be able to inaugurate at one stroke a movement in the interest of human rights and human liberties as important, as far-reaching, as grand as this. And in the name of the women of the civilized world, I am here to congratulate you.
Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave? the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Another recreation of Wyoming history was also underway in Laramie with the renovation of the Territorial Prison. The Wyoming Territorial Prison has gone through many changes through the years, but it has held up well in the harsh Wyoming climate and has kept the original look as it did for over 100 years. The north wing of the structure was built in 1872 after protest from Fort Sanders and other forts in the area that they were tired of housing civilian criminals.
With the railroad coming to Wyoming, there was an increasing population, and they had several incidents in Laramie that and Wyoming in general, that prompted the building of a penitentiary.
The central administration structure as well as the south wing were added in 1889. The whole structure cost about $60,000 to build. The prison had 84 cells when finished, including 2 cells specifically made for women prisoners.
We're in the second floor area of the south wing now, standing in what used to be the women's cell section and the hospital room of the building. When the restoration is completed, we'll refurnish these rooms. We'll put the women's cell block back, or the cell area back, the 2 cells that we had for women here, 3rd cell that was used as a bathroom, and we'll restore the hospital portion of the building. We'll put back period furnishings so it looks like it did in 1889.
It's not known for sure who all served time in the big house, but the most infamous is Butch Cassidy.
He was put in 1894 for stealing horses out in the western part of the state. Pardoned in 1896 on the condition that he wouldn't commit any more crimes in Wyoming, and as far as we know, he didn't. He went out of state and committed crimes, but he did keep his word in Wyoming.
In the restored prison, you'll be able to see the original cells, like this one that held all those famous outlaws, and it really gives you the feeling of what life was like back then.
Life was fairly tough for the prisoners here. The only time they really spent in the prison in their cells was at night sleeping or when the weather was bad. Otherwise, they were employed at a variety of tasks on the site, ranging from, cutting ice from the river in the wintertime. They had a contract with the Union Pacific Railroad to supply ice in the summer. They made bricks out here. They quarried stone.
But all of this came to an end in 1903 when the Wyoming Congress decided to divide up Wyoming's main institutions. Laramie already had both the University of Wyoming and the prison, so the prison went to Rawlins. The University of Wyoming acquired the building and turned it into an experimental stock farm. And that's how it remained for the next 83 years until in 1986, the Laramie Chamber of Commerce and others came up with some innovative ideas.
The committee evolved into the Wyoming Territorial Prison Corporation in 1986. They actually started looking at the potential for economic development through the prison, the tourism efforts.
So with funding from the state and 2 separate 1% county taxes, the Wyoming Territorial Park project is underway.
Really, the idea for the theme park is a living history park or a museum without walls concept. And in that, we hope to interpret the eras of Wyoming history, most of Wyoming history. We'll start with the Indian occupation or the Native American occupation of the territory or this part of the country, working up through the mountain men and the railroad coming to Wyoming, the cowboy ranching eras, and hopefully end up with a small Victorian town of about turn of the century vintage on that.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this package of video memories. There were so many, and we picked the ones we hope that kind of best exemplified what this Centennial was all about. It was a lot of fun to cover.
Oh, it certainly was a pleasure to be a part of this Centennial celebration, and now we're hoping that with this tape, you folks out there will pass this on down through the generations, and maybe at the Bicentennial they'll be watching it.
2090 would be a fun tape to look at if they have videotape machines.
A fun time to be there, huh?
As we leave you, we want to share with you all the names of the people that work behind the camera to make this kind of coverage possible.
Thanks for joining us.